nerds, what's up? Welcome to part 2 of my chat with Django Wexler and Fonda Lee. In this part, we will be seeing all the questions asked from the audience. If you missed part 1, don't forget to go check it out. I'll have it linked below as well at the end of this video. I hope you enjoy this awesome conversation. Well, we want to open up to questions from the audience, so I guess we can do a raised hand sort of situation, unless there's...
Don't all go at once.
Yeah.
You gotta ask questions or we'll just sit here in silence. It'll be very
It'll be
awkward.
I guess my question's to both of you. Are you siblings yourself, and how does that inform the sibling dynamic?
I am. I have a younger brother. And then my parents divorced and both got remarried, and both new marriages came with 2 sisters. So I went in my teen years from having no sisters to having 4, which is a little unusual. It's not often you acquire an older sister. But yeah, and I think it's been a big part of it. Yeah, what about you?
I also have one younger brother, and that's it. So like I have a pretty small family. So it was interesting to write like a family saga that has like all these characters and you know, a lot of sibling dynamics. But it absolutely did play in because, you know, I really do feel like, especially like in Asian American families, you're really tight. Like there's this sense of like, you know, especially if your parents have immigrated and they're in like they're in a new country, the family is like, it's such like a nucleus of, you know, there's just a lot of obligation, expectation that comes with that. And I think that definitely kind of fed into some of the themes of the story.
This question is for the both of you. When you're like coming up with ideas, are you more inspired by like certain plot points and themes, or are you more inspired by like characters that you come up with? Like what is more prominent there?
It really depends on the project. So this, I guess I'm now on like my 8th, 9th book? I've lost track.
Really?
But yeah. So I feel like each project has come to me in a different way. Sometimes it is a character that occurs first. Sometimes it's like a particular plot twist or premise. Sometimes it's some element of the world. In the case of the Greenbone Saga, it was really just like vibes. I just wanted to like, I just had this idea to be like, you know, like kung fu and gangsters in modern city and like, you know, drive-by shootings and magic jade. Like it was just sort of this idea, and I had no characters, I had no plot. And it kind of came to me, and then it stalled out for a couple of years while I wrote other books because I just had like vibes, but no actual structure to the thing. And then when I kind of came back to it, really focused on it and said, you know, this is the heart of it is a family saga. Then I like start to put all the pieces together and create the characters and play off their dynamics. So it often is like something, it can come from any direction, and then you've kind of glomming on other material to make it a full thing.
For me, it's usually, it can be any of those things, but at different times. I keep a file, and I just sort of jot down ideas that come to me. And when the time comes to start a new project, often it's a bit like sort of filling up a box with like Lego pieces and then putting them together. So I'll take a world design from here and a character from there and, you know, a plot from somewhere else and put them together. Sometimes I try things several times as, you know, like, does this work in this context? And then I'll like put it back, and then later I'll use it for something else. So like these books, in the first time I wanted to do this thing, it was more of a space opera. It was like more directly Star Wars. And I was like, yeah, that reads too much like fan fiction. I didn't want to do that. So I kind of put it back and let it bubble for a while. And then later I got this idea for I wanted a sort of post-fantasy apocalypse. So like lots of fantasy worlds have like, oh, the ancients, and there's like one building in the middle of the wilderness that you have to journey to. And I wanted one where the fallen civilization was like our civilization in size, and so like even hundreds of years later there's just crap everywhere. It's not like, oh, the rare ruins. It's like completely ubiquitous, covering the landscape, and these people are sort of living amidst the ruins of a kind of fantasy world. And then putting that together with the Jedi plot was like, oh, that works. And so it's a little bit like that. It can come either way.
I like that analogy of it being like a box of Lego.
It really feels that way sometimes.
Right?
Like I go in and I've got pages and pages and pages now of like little things, and I like read through. I'm like, oh, that'd be cool. Like, would that fit in this story?
Has there been anything really interesting or profound that either of you have learned from your writing process? And the second question is, what's your favorite Avatar: The Last Airbender character?
Okay, I'll answer the last one first, which is Prince Zuko all the way. There's no other answer. Any of you disagree? You were wrong. No. But what have I learned that has been insightful and profound? Honestly, when I began writing, I kind of thought that it would get easier as you went along. But like, it really doesn't.
That is so true.
Right? Like, you write one book and you're like, this is so hard. Writing a book is so hard. But you know what? If I can just get an agent, if I can get a book deal, if I can get one book published, then like the next book will be easier. And then you do the next book. The second book is like way harder. And then you're like, well, okay, I've written a whole ass trilogy now. Like everything else is going to be a cakewalk, right? But like now I'm working on a completely new project and it's kicking my ass. So like I think what I've learned from the process actually of writing is that like, it never gets easier because you keep learning something about your own process, and each book is its own thing. You only ever have, like, there's times I read something out of my books and I'm like, who wrote this? It's pretty good. Like, how can I write something this good?
Yeah, right.
Like and so I think just being at peace with your own process wherever you're at, and knowing it, like it's not a just a linear journey that you might expect from or of a normal job, and just realizing that creativity has ebbs and flows. Each project is different challenges. You actually may struggle more because your standards are higher now. Your expectations for yourself are greater. Your readers have expectations for you. Your publisher, your editor, your agent, like they all now, it's not just you as well. Like you're not just happily writing your fanfic like all by yourself in your college dorm. Like now, you're a professional. You gotta like be professional. So, I think just being kind of taking that to heart and trusting yourself, and then also being okay with your own process and sort of the ups and downs of the career, what I kind of take away.
Yeah, I mean, that's the classic problem, is the second book problem, which, people talk about. And it's not really a mystery. It's just like, you write your book, you have no time pressure, you're like crafting it, you gotta make it as good as I can, gotta get an agent, gotta get published. And then you sell the book, you get an agent. They're like, great, we want the next one in 12 months or 18 months. And you're like, oh no. Right, like now I have to do the same thing on a deadline, and
also you have to be like promoting your first book while all this is happening.
It's tough.
Yeah, that second book.
I don't know if I definitely agree with that. I don't know if I have anything as profound. I've gotten better about, since becoming a pro, about not being precious about writing, I think. This is a job that I do. And the main thing was the observation that, sometimes I'll write something and I'll be like, oh, this is terrible and I'm having such a hard time with it and it's no good. And then sometimes I'm like, this is really good and I really enjoy it. And then like later I read through the book and there are parts that I like and the parts that I don't like, but they don't line up. It's not the time that I thought things were terrible sometimes produces really good work, and the time that I thought things were great sometimes produces really bad work. And so accepting that it's mostly in my head, I guess, is what it comes down to, and like sort of making peace with that, as you said. It helps me. Like, people ask, like, oh, what do you do when you get writer's block? And it's like, I don't really believe in writer's block. Like, at least not for novels. Novels are a marathon. That's the thing about them. Like, you can't write a novel in the sort of flush of inspiration the way you imagine, writing a poem or a short fiction. You have this idea and you sit down and you write it and it's perfect and brilliant. And like, novels are just too long for that. It's going to take you months and months, and there are going to be days when you sit down and you're like, this is miserable and I hate it. And that doesn't mean that the work is bad, I guess, is where I come with it. And then Avatar-wise, it's young Toph.
Solid choice.
That's
Solid
fair.
second choice.
One in the back, if we have time.
Hello from the Fantasy Book of the Month podcast.
Oh, hi.
Hey, book of the month.
Second, Django's right about Toph.
Oh, well.
And third, I'd love to hear your favorite moments from your role-playing game experiences.
Oh, God. That's, you want to go first?
No, you go first. You felt
Oh,
really good, a
God.
lot more than me.
Trying to think of one that doesn't require tons of context. We were in we were running a campaign where all the players were playing monsters, and my friend Constantine was playing a mummy. And this made him sort of very slow and clumsy, but like nearly indestructible, because this is like a mummy fighter in heavy armor. And so like, there was a part where they were like ambushing some guys in like a warehouse, and they were all like up in the rafters, and like the guys are down doing some deal or whatever, and the party jumps down to ambush them, and they all like do their like cool thing, like the thief guy just like flips down, and like the wizard guy descends with like feather fall, and like one guy teleports down or whatever. Constantine's Bobby is like just like tries to jump, fails, falls on his face 50 feet, just clonk with like this clatter of armor, and he gets up, he's like, I'm fine. And I'm like, I'm really not sure which is more intimidating. Like the guy who does the acrobatic flip, or the guy who just like fine after falling on his head. That character also had a penchant for some reason they ended up fighting a lot of sea monsters, and he decided early on that the way to deal with sea monsters was from the inside, because he didn't need to breathe, and he was, indestructible. And so he would deliberately get swallowed by, a giant shark or whatever, and then go to town. So there was a lot of that.
So, I mean, right now I'm playing a like half-elf rogue, and there seems to be this recurring pattern where I keep getting possessed. So that's kind of like the thing. It's sort of like a running joke now. It's like I was possessed by an evil doll, and then I got possessed by like some other curse. And anyways, I've like had my mind taken over like multiple times, and then I like attack my friends. And so that's like I'm just waiting to see how I get possessed or lose my mind next.
So, particularly in the Greenbone Saga, there's many a point where I think readers stop and say, did that just happen? That get debated in Twitter polls and things of which caught you off guard the most. When you're writing those, is it like evil laugh, like it's going to catch people and it sort of spurs you on, or are they hard because you know that people are going to be so invested in that moment?
A little of both. Yeah, like it's like I'll be like, hey, how can I do this? Like, so it's about like it's not. I know that it only works if it affects me, right? So if I'm not devastated, like no one else is good. It has to devastate me first, right? It has to catch me off guard first. So a lot of work goes into making some of those moments, making those moments feel very unexpected, but then also inevitable. If I've done my job when they happen, you should be like, I can't believe that happened, but that makes total sense that it did happen that way. And that is a tricky thing that often has to be, the groundwork for it has to be laid in revision, so that all the like clues of like how this makes sense that it would happen this way are there, but they're in there subtly enough that hopefully you will be surprised or shocked, or you won't see it coming when it actually happens. But I mean, there's definitely emotionally for me, I know there's things that I know are going to happen, and I'm writing towards that, and I'm kind of dreading it. Like I'll like, there'll be scenes I even dread writing because I know what's going to happen, and then I don't want to write them.
I'm definitely in the evil laughter camp myself. I'm definitely more like that.
What do you think is the most overused plot or storyline in fantasy today?
In fantasy today, probably, oh no, the king is dying, who's going to be the new king? There's a lot of that. I think because George Martin did it, and people decided that was what cool fantasy looks like now. And it can be done really well. And I read many. I love the George Martin books, but it happens a lot.
Right.
Okay, I feel like every time I'm introduced to a king, he's on his deathbed. Are there no healthy kings? What's going on?
Says the guy who wrote the post-apocalyptic.
I mean, I did it too, right? I literally did it too.
Yeah. Most overused. I mean, at one point I would have said The Chosen One, right? But I do think that we've gotten away from it recently, and subverted it in like different ways. I feel
that was
like
certainly
now,
the most overused when I was a teenager.
Yeah,
like in
definitely.
the 90s. I feel like Wheel of Time was kind of the peak of many, many years of Chosen One stories.
Right. Yeah, so I feel like we have moved away from that, and like to the tropes that do exist. There is a lot of writers now who are doing a really great job doing fresh and innovative and subversive things with them.
No, I'm really happy with fantasy these days. I feel like we got away from the everything being a Chosen One story. We got away from everything being, knights and castles.
Right.
That for a while it felt like every fantasy was D&D, right? It was
Some
always
pastiche of northern medieval Europe.
And so now we're like, we've got other places, we've got other time periods. There's the whole, even just history. There's the whole of history to work with here. Plus, you can make stuff up. And both of these series are a good example of series that like these would have been very
hard
weird
to publish
in 1995.
Yeah, for sure. I at the time that Jade City came out, I said like I wouldn't have been able to publish this even 5 or 10 years ago.
And so, but now lots of people are doing it, which is great. Makes me happy. Yeah, when Shadow Campaigns came out, they're like, "Ooh, is Flintlock fantasy the next big thing?" Because me and Brian McClellan both had series and came out about around the same time. And people would ask me that, and I'd say, well, I'm hoping it's not just Flintlock. I hope it's like not, 12th century England, right? Something else. Like this happens to be 17th century France, but like there's a whole other universe of places and people and time periods you can do.
On that note, is there like a plot line or like a story that you see yourself like exploring in the future that you haven't had a chance to get to yet?
There's a lot of stuff I want to do. I have a big file of ideas. It usually comes down to what books I'm reading. I've been reading some World War II stuff, and I think that's kind of underused in fantasy. There's some like fantasy World War II stories, like actual Americans and Germans with magic, that are pretty good. Ian Tregillis has a great series. but there's not a lot of secondary world where we're just like happen to be at that tech level the way we happen to be at 12th century England in other books, and I think that would be interesting.
So I have 2 things on my get to list. Well, actually, I have a lot more than that, but like 2 that I'll mention. One is I'd like to do a horror novel. So I've played both in science fiction, fantasy, and I'm working on a science fiction project right now. But at some point, I want to write a horror novel because I think that would be a fun challenge, different challenge. And then I do have an idea for a fantasy series that I don't know when I'm going to get to it, but is an ensemble cast with like a group of friends who were like friends in youth and then split apart and all went their different ways and like came back together, and how they've all changed in that time. So I kind of want to do a story that does for like friendship what the Greenbone Saga did for family. Oh gosh, a favorite trope. Do you have one? I don't know. Tropes are like screwdrivers.
Yeah.
Right? There's so many of them, and you kind of pick the tools that you need for.
There's like themes I keep coming back to.
Yeah.
I do a lot of gay women because it's something that I can do, and it's something that's kind of underrepresented in the genre, but that's not really a trope. There's a lot of I've written a couple of books where there's horrifying body horror magic, because I think in any context where you have magic that can heal people, you could also use the same magic to take them apart, and I feel like the horror value of that is underexploited. But no, I it's hard to pin down. I think I probably have to like go and read a bunch of my stuff and be like, oh, I do have a favorite trope.
Like I mean, I'm sort of similar to you in that I can see recurring themes, right? Rather than be like, oh, what's my favorite trope? There's kind of like this thing of you write a bunch of stuff and then you're like, oh, that's interesting. I keep doing that, or like readers tell you, like what you've written after you've written it. So like my books almost always have some sort of people punching each other. Dysfunctional families are a thing in my books, and like kind of morally gray choices and like that sort of moral ambiguity, in not so much in characters but in societies. That comes up a lot for me. So yeah,
I don't like to think of books in terms of tropes when I'm writing them.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of talk back and forth are like, oh, is this like obsession with tropes bad? Is it good? Like whatever. And I think, my opinion, so take it for what it's worth, is that it's fine for readers. It's fine as an analysis tool to compare stories. But when you start using it as a way to construct stories, it's a quick way to get into stereotypes. And so I try not to.
Yeah. No, it's a really good point, because at one point I remember like seeing my book on tvtropes.com, and it listed all these like things, and I was like, huh, interesting. I didn't even really think of it that way, or I'd like never identified,
like, that's
most
true.
of those.
And I'm like, that's a stretch.
Yeah, I know, right? Oh, right, exactly. So like when you're writing the story, you're just trying to be true to the characters, and you're trying to be true to the narrative. And then afterwards people will be like, oh, that's this, and that. Only because they're kind of picking it out and sort of comparing it to all the other like stories that are out there, right?
And that can be useful,
totally right?
To help readers, find things that they like, right? But like, I don't know that it's that useful for the writers,
right?
When you were first starting to write your book or your series, was there any ideas that you really wanted to fit in but ended up not fitting in? Was there any ideas like that you really wish you could have made work for the series?
I'm trying to remember if I had any for this series.
Not really, insofar. I mean, my books are pretty long.
I'm just looking at the last one there. I'm like, evidently not.
No, so like I feel like everything that I needed to tell that story made it in there. And if it ended up on the cutting room floor, it's because It belonged on the cutting room floor. So I don't have any regrets about stuff that I wanted to write, but that didn't make it into the book or didn't fit into the book. Especially because it was really my goal with this series to make it an epic fantasy that felt contained and still intimate. So there were lots of times during these books where I could have gone on a divergent path. Like I could have had a whole other side plot involving the characters that were in Espenia, or, you know, I could have taken some of the minor characters and made them POV characters. Like, there's so many places where I could have leaned into scope creep, and I very much didn't want to do that. I wanted to always keep it contained to the family. However, I will say, especially as I neared the end of writing Jade Legacy, it wasn't so much as there were things I wanted to fit in that didn't go in there, but I could see all the, like, the sort of side stories that I wasn't going to write. And so I ended up writing a novella and a bunch of short stories because I just didn't want to leave the world yet. And so I think everything I wanted to go into these books went into it, and it was more just like, oh, I could envision a spin-off with, like, these characters, especially because the book has a large cast of characters. There's characters that were cool that just show up for small parts, but, like, I still wanted them to feel like they had a life outside of the role that they played in these books. Like, there's characters like Vin the sniper. Like, he shows up in like 2-3 chapters in the third book, but I'm like, man, that guy's cool. I could write a story about him.
I don't really. I tend to outline my books pretty thoroughly, so it's not something that comes up. Usually, by the time I actually get around to writing the book, it's pretty rare that, like, there's a big chunk that doesn't make it in. I'm a sort of very planner person these days, so not really.
This is more for the Greenbone Saga, but there's, like, a lot of emotional turbulence in your books, and there are so many interesting.
Sorry.
Dysfunctional family, but also a lot of ambiguity and how your characters have to interact with those ambiguities. How do you, like, control for that? How do you, like, navigate that when you're writing your If that makes sense.
I don't know. No,
How did you do that?
I don't know. If someone could tell me, that would be great. I mean, it really did feel at times like the book would break my brain because there were a lot of moving pieces. There were a lot of balls to keep in the air. And even things like keeping track of continuity was this considerable task. So I have, like, this timeline program that's got, like, every character, when they were born, when they died, if they died, like, the major events in their life. And it spans from, like, years before Jade City starts to, like, the very end of Jade Legacy. It covers, like, you know, huge periods of time. So there was just a lot to keep track of. And I think the only way that I could kind of keep focus on, especially when I was writing Jade Legacy, because it spanned such a large amount of time, was like eating the elephant one bite at a time, basically, and breaking it down into smaller pieces. So Jade Legacy, I said, okay, what are the important parts of this story? And I really kind of tackled them, almost writing like 4 novellas that would form like one big novel, because it was just too much to keep in my head at one time. And I just have to kind of like focus on individual pieces. And then as the picture kind of coalesced and all these pieces were on the board, it was like taking a jigsaw puzzle and like slotting them together and figuring out where everything fit. But yeah, like I really, though, it was the main task was just staying true to those characters and keeping the focus on those characters and those character interactions, and everything else kind of flows from that.
Is there a book that you are each looking forward to coming out to read, not that you read?
I am so far behind because
I'm glad you said that.
Well,
I have like about
I have
6 arcs that I
I
haven't
have
read
like
yet.
stacks and stacks of these books. It's like I can't look forward to something coming out until I eat all the ones that are already on my plate.
What about the book that you're looking forward to reading
What am I reading next? I just picked one up, a new KJ Parker book. If you don't know KJ Parker, his work is amazing. The most recent one that's out is the series starting with 16 Ways to Defend a Walled City, and ending with How to Conquer the World and Get Away with It. What I'm actually reading right now, rereading, is a book called The Price You Pay by Aidan Trewin, which is a pen name for Nick Harkaway. And more people need to read this book because it's absolutely amazing. It's like... It's almost hard to describe. It's all in a very tight first person from this guy who is like a complete lunatic coke fiend. But, you know, so it's like Die Hard or Last Man Standing if Bruce Willis was like a rabid coke fiend. And it's great. It's so funny. It's laugh out loud funny. So The Price You Pay, I highly, highly recommend it. What about you?
The one that I'm most looking forward to getting to right now is Richard Swan's second book, Tyranny of Faith. So I really enjoy Justice of Kings. Some of you may have heard of it. I think Tyranny of Faith just came out very recently. So that's on my next to read. But it is, it's like a legal thriller fantasy starring Judge Dredd, basically.
That's awesome.
It's great.
You guys are both developing worlds from the grounds up. I was wondering, how long do you allow yourself to kind of play with those worlds before you're like, okay, I need to stop playing and actually work on my first draft?
It depends on when my deadline is.
Yeah, it's a real like world building disease is real. It's a real danger.
Yeah. I would say I always give myself probably at least a month or two to kind of do the background outlining, world building, research, that sort of thing. But then it's also an ongoing process. Like I need to do enough that I can start writing. And then as I'm writing, there's going to be times when I'm like, well, I do not know how that works. I'm going to have to make a big note that I need to come back to that. And sometimes I have to just stop in my tracks and figure something out. But sometimes if it's something that's really pertinent to the narrative, I have to do that. If it's something like, I have no idea what flowers are in this garden, then like I can put a peg in it and continue. So I don't think of it as stages of like world building and then drafting. It's really an iterative process, because sometimes your narrative and what your characters are up to is going to then circle back in and inform the world building that you have to do, especially when you're writing a series like this, where maybe you laid breadcrumbs for yourself, or you come back maybe you're stuck somewhere in the middle of the second book and you're like, I don't know where this is going, and then you go back to the first book and you're like, oh, there's that thing I mentioned, and like, I'm a genius, I knew I put that in there for a reason.
Like, damn you, past me.
Yeah. Why did you make that world building choice?
Why are these two places so far apart? Yeah, I mean, I think I'm very similar. The temptation of like, okay, I got to get all the world building done, and then I'll know everything, and then I can like write the book.
No, that way lies madness.
Yeah, you'll go crazy.
Not.
There's no end. There's no end.
Yeah.
You always are gonna need to be able to be like, well, where do they make cheese in this world, and like figure it out on the fly.
Yeah. And also, like, your reader doesn't need to know all that.
Right.
Like, nobody needs to know all your world building. That is,
yeah,
it's for you.
The danger of doing too much world building is that you'll then feel compelled to put it all in the book, and then the readers will be like, I don't care about the cheese. Stop with the cheese.
I once met this aspiring writer who was making very, very slow progress on their novel because they had like gone down the rat hole really deeply and had gotten to the point where they were like food blogging recipes from their secondary world, and I was like, oh.
And that could definitely
I can
fun,
see
but
the
you'll
appeal,
drive
but
yourself
like
crazy.
We, at some point,
like at a
hopefully
certain point,
the
it
book
becomes procrastination.
right? Yeah, because it's
And
always
then you won't
easier
get your book done.
Yeah, and then you won't get paid, which is not good.
So I'd love to ask a follow-up question to that. Maybe, Django, you referred to this with your cheese, but can you share a random world building element that's not apparent in the books that you just find cute or fun about your worlds?
It gets into it a little bit in Emperor of Ruin, but like all the people in Ashes of the Sun have like weird hair and eye colors, and there's actually like a reason. There's like ancient genetic engineering, and they like get into why. But for the first 2 books, it's just like this is just a thing that happens, and we don't know why that is because they don't know why it is.
So in the Greenbone Saga, there's kind of a Cold War dynamic that's going on between these 2 big superpowers, and the main sort of underlying basis for that is religious conflict between them. So like it's mentioned there's like this one country, Igutan, with like this sort of expansionist religious order called Deliverantism, and that like conflicts with this other country, but like it's all sort of for the main characters and the point of the story, it's all kind of background noise for them because they're a third party in this, and potentially the target of these 2 superpowers. So I had to still, like, as a writer, know what the deal was and like what were sort of the tenets of those religions, so I could work in like little mentions of their beliefs and their rituals, but no, like readers don't need to know all of that.
Why jade specifically? Like why would you go for that specific stone?
So I think it's a pretty common fantasy trope to have like magic gems or crystals of some sort. Like that shows up a lot in fantasy, right? But in Eastern culture, jade was always seen as being like the most precious substance. It was considered more precious than like gold or diamonds, and it also has like a huge amount of cultural significance. It was seen as this link between heaven and earth. So I just took something that was already really figuratively magical and had a lot of cultural significance, and made it like literally magical. So yeah. And then I also just loved the idea of it being something that could have a lot of like ways people would wear it, and they would wear it pierced in their bodies or like on different jewelry, and so that just also helped create like the visual aesthetic in my mind that I was going for.
I'm gonna follow up on that one. If you were a green bone, how would you wear your jade?
Oh, good question.
You've already got some.
I already have some. I do have some here. Yeah. I mean, I would have to win a few clean-bladed duels to get more. That is good. I think I'd want something kind of like Shay's choker. Yeah. That's what I'd go for.
You don't want to.
I don't want it like studded in my body, yeah.
Well, because
I'm kind of.
You don't want anything that's so loose someone could grab it in a fight,
Well,
but
also, I'm
the
just
like
kind
studded in your body is tough.
Yeah. Not a big I don't think I do well with like that many piercings.
Not a fan.
Who wins? 2 out of 3. Rock, scissors.
He wants you guys to play rock, paper, scissors, best 2 out of 3.
I'm pretty bad, but okay. Here we go.
Okay. 1, 2, 3. She does.
Okay.
2, 3. She does.
Oh, there you go.
Fonda.
Thank you guys for answering all of our questions, and I think there's going to be signing now, but I will let the Barnes & Noble's employees take care of that. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to go check out part 1 if you haven't. I'll see you next time. Bye.